So welcome everybody. Nice to see you all. So I'll do just a little bit of a review of what we did the preceding classes, and then with an invitation to see if you have any questions or comments. So as you might remember, on Tuesday, we started with Kim introducing this idea of the ordinary gods. That is, these things that we find ourselves taking refuge in: jobs, bank accounts, relationships, etc. And then these common ways in which we find ourselves transitioning away from what we might call these ordinary gods towards a deeper refuge or a different type of refuge. And often that's because we've had the failure of this ordinary refuge to turn out to be a reliable refuge after maybe a major disruption in our life of some sort, or maybe there's just a disenchantment of the conventional ways in which we've been living our life, or maybe we've been touched by something beautiful in the spiritual life and wanting to turn towards that way. And then for the four of us, we each described a little bit how we made this transition and encouraged you guys to do that in the small groups. And then on Thursday, David and Kim discussed the concept of inner and outer refuges of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, recognizing that this is a distinction that, isn't, that we're making up isn't, or I'm not saying we're only making up, but that gets made up as a way to maybe consider it. Doesn't have to be considered this way, but it can be really useful and helpful. And then I also spoke about refuge in what we might say in nibbana, or non-clinging, as a way to be a support for one's life. And we ended the class with Ajahn Pasano doing the refuge chant with a community. So with that is just a little overview of what we've done the past two classes. Now I'd like to open it up to see if there's some comments or questions of what we've covered thus far before we continue on today. And you can use your Zoom hand, your physical hand, or if you'd like, you could put some things in the chat box too. Any comments or questions? I have a theory: if I allow an awkward silence, somebody will just be bound to just get us out of the awkwardness. So here's David Whiteside.
Hi. Um, just a couple of comments. Um, First of all, the first 2 days have been really good for me. Have helped me put things in my life in perspective, not only recent events, but I'm 82, so long historical events. And I want to thank you for that. And the other comment is just to say I've been sitting with the four of you for 4 years. In the mornings and in the Sunday mornings and Monday evenings and so on. And I live too far away from Redwood City to get to IMC, so it's all been on Zoom. So thank you, COVID, for putting IMC more on Zoom so I can be with you. I have done 2 week-long retreats at IRC, but this has been my first time to really talk with 4 of my teachers. So thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, David. Thank you. That's lovely. It's it fills our hearts to hear this. Thank you very much.
And I would just add and point out that this is an aspect of refuge and sangha. It really is a wonderful place where we sort of, we create a community of practice that is really supportive, helps us connect with the Dharma. So beautifully expressed, and that's part of what we are taking up here, the power of refuge, right? The power of refuge in a very direct, tangible way in our practice lives and in our sort of the greater lives in which our practice happens and unfolds.
Thank you, David. Maybe we could say the four of us would take refuge in each other too, right? So practicing together, definitely. We practice together, teach together, and hang out together. We can, yeah. Uh, Jerry.
Yeah, this has been a pleasant surprise and invaluable. And just, in 3 sessions, I'm counting today. I'm quite grateful. And this, for me, and this, I have a feeling it's not just me, but a quality of refuge, no matter how we're going to define it, is spaciousness. It's all of a sudden the world is bigger and more, and therefore that we can sort of fill it up with goodness. If it's I don't do well like this. I spent 70 years living like this, but living like this is much nicer. You can't see my arms because of the camera.
I can see your arms.
Yeah, that's my point. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. And if I may, I will build on what you said. And you were saying life is better when it's bigger, but maybe the opposite. We could say like life is not so good when we're so self-centered and tight in the center, and everything has to be about me or something like this. So, yeah, okay. Thank you, Jerry. Anybody else have a comment or something they'd like to say before we move on this morning? Any of my co-teachers, something you'd like to say?
I just say, based on a few reflections, and I'm already feeling a sense of relationship with the refuge that's being developed, maybe in the last few days of exploring this. And so that feels very tender. And so there's a sense of a refuge is ever alive in us. And how do we relate to it? And how do we find our way here? Yeah. So just want to mirror that back.
Thank you, Ying.
And Kim may have something to say too, but I just want to also just say that our refuge is inclusive of all of us, all of who we are, each of us individually, and then all of us here. And I just want to acknowledge that Maria has put in the chat that she's ill and thus not sharing video, but I want to just welcome her. She says she hears us. So just making sure she feels included.
Thank you. Thank you.
There's really not much to add to all of this, except to say that maybe anticipating toward where we're going today, I liked Diana's pointing to the smaller and the larger. We'll be talking about refuge as something that becomes shared and something that can become offered. It's not only for us, but it expands out from us. And what would that mean? So we're taking yet another step today. So maybe we should begin that.
Thank you, Kim. And I'll pass it on to David.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. And Diana and everyone. Yeah, so even kind of transitioning from these comments, I like this idea. I think it was Jerry who said the world is bigger when it's better. And then Diana sort of reminded us that part of what makes the world bigger allows us to maybe allow other people in particular to sort of enter into it, or other concerns beyond our little world of concerns and projections and suffering. One of the things I mentioned, I think, on Tuesday was just that one way to think about refuge, to pick it apart to its Latin roots, I said that in addition to skedaddle and vamoose, it could mean something like making ourselves scarce. And that can be taken in a lot of ways, but in a Buddhist way, or in the Buddhist context, or in the context of this class and of what's just been shared, yeah, that idea of sort of thinning out a little bit, making ourselves scarce. And yet today I want to introduce something. This is a section that we call, this third class we wanted to call, I'm looking over here, Self as Refuge, and refuge for all beings. One of the paradoxes of our practice is that we don't get rid of the self without a skillful self, without skillful actions, and thus some agency. And so This is just one of the things we hold in our practice, and sometimes can be challenging to grasp that there is skillful self in our practice, and it's only at the very end of a path of letting go that we let go of some agency and some of what congeals around any agency. So, kind of going to enter that a little bit today, although not directly. We haven't yet really, in this class, unusual for the four of us, we haven't sort of plunged into suttas. So I'm going to do that. And just check my time and make sure it'd be easy to go on and on about all of this, of course. But I wanted to, in addressing this idea of refuge in self, making oneself refuge for the practice, I want to kind of explore where we get this idea. And one of the wonderful places it comes to us in the teachings and texts is Digha Nikaya 16, the 16th so numbered discourse in the collection of long discourses, the Digha Nikaya. And some of you may know, David, if you've been around all this time, we taught the four of us a class on Digha Nikaya 16. So we won't go into it a lot of depth here. It's an amazing long discourse with just so many fascinating details that it's worthy of a whole, I don't know, 3 or 4 class session in that course. But I want to, without kind of telling you much about what's going to come up in it, let me just read this passage. It's beautiful to me. I hope you may also find it beautiful, but I think it really is an extraordinary sort of teaching, as one of the more direct teachings we have from the Buddha in a very, in the context of Sangha, in the context of refuge. And this passage, which comes fairly late in the sutta, this is the sutta that the discourse that talks about the death of the Buddha and his entry into his final nibbana, the final letting go as he dies. And so it's poignant. And over the course of the sutta, he sort of gets more and more ill. He's 80. He's more than 80. He's probably been teaching for 40 years. He is ailing. And so that sort of almost an elegiac feel sort of is there in the background of the sutta. So here's the passage. Soon after the Buddha had recovered from a sickness, he had a couple final sicknesses. Soon after the Buddha recovered from this sickness, he came out from his dwelling. He sat in the shade of the porch on the seat that had been spread out for him. I'm not reading verbatim, by the way. I'm interpolating little things here and there to make it read maybe a little bit easier to read. And then the Venerable Ananda, his longtime associate and confidant and someone who memorized the teachings, the Venerable Ananda went up to the Buddha, bowed, sat down to one side and said to him, "It's fantastic, it's wonderful that the Buddha is now comfortable and well again. Because when the Buddha was sick, my body felt like it was drugged. I was disoriented and the teachings weren't clear to me. Still, at least I was consoled by the thought that the Buddha would not die without bringing something up regarding the future of the Sangha." To this, the Buddha responds, fascinating response. He says, but what could the Sangha expect from me, Ananda? I've taught this Dhamma without making any distinction between secret and public teachings. The Buddha doesn't have a closed fist of a tutor when it comes to the teachings. Offers the teachings, all of them, freely. If there's anyone who thinks, oh, I'm going to now lead the mendicant, I'm now going to lead the Sangha after the Buddha dies, or the Sangha is meant for me, let them bring up something about the future of the Sangha. But the Buddha doesn't think like this. So why should the Buddha bring up something regarding the Sangha? He goes on to say, I'm now old, elderly, senior. I'm advanced in years and have reached the final stage of life. I'm 80 years old. Just as a decrepit old cart is kept going with leather straps, we might say with baling wire and gum, in the same way, the Buddha's body is kept together as if it was held together, a cart held together with a strap. Sometimes the Buddha, in deep meditation, is able to is able to rest in the immersion, signless immersion in the heart. But only then does the Buddha's body become comfortable. And then he says this, so Ananda, live as your own island, your own refuge with no other refuge. Let the teachings, let this Dharma be your island and your refuge with no other refuge. And he says, and how should you do this? Meditate by observing the body as body. Meditate observing bodily sensations, feeling tone as feeling tone. Meditate observing, contemplating mind as mind, and patterns of thought as patterns of thought. Do so in a way that's keen, aware, mindfulness, and lacking in covetousness and displeasure for the world. That's how practitioners in this community make themselves their own island, their own refuge with no other refuge. And that's how the teaching is their island and their refuge with no other refuge. It says, whether now or after I've died, any who live as their own island, their own refuge with no other refuge, with the teachings, with the Dharma as their island and their refuge, with no other refuge, those followers of mine who want to continue training will be the best among the best. So this is a fascinating and, to my mind, really beautiful passage in which the Buddha shares something really important about refuge and also about maybe the skillful self in which we need to take refuge in order to eventually let go of all our suffering. Among other things, there's a really interesting conflation here, and you probably heard it or possibly recognize it. The Buddha says twice, live as your own island, your own refuge with no other refuge. Let the teachings be your island, your refuge with no other refuge. Well, which is it? Am I to live myself as an island, as a refuge with no other refuge? Or am I supposed to take the Dharma as an island and refuge with no other refuge? And my reading of it, at least this morning, is that the conflation is purposeful and points us yet again to what we pointed to in the very first guided meditation in this three-part class, which is to our own direct experience of the arising and passing of suffering. That's the island. That's the refuge. And we don't need any other refuge. And one of the things I think the Buddha is doing at the end here is, okay, there's concerns about the future of the Sangha. Somebody may emerge as a leader. There's all this. He's reminding his followers and Ananda, who will play a critical role in keeping the teachings alive and passing them forward. He's reminding Ananda and everyone and us to keep returning to the direct experience we can know in the meditation. It's not by chance either. There's very little that's happening by chance in these texts at this point of the Digha Nikaya. They're literary almost. And when the Buddha says he's old and he's held together by straps, he points out that the only place he finds physical comfort is in the meditation. So over and over again, in response to Ananda's questions, he's directing attention back to the meditation practice and to what's available there and what can be known there. So I think there's something very usefully known here too about this role of self, that what we do, I mean, where the skillful agency lies is continuing to develop, and the Buddha here mentions the 4 ways of establishing mindfulness, or 4 arenas in which a mindfulness should be established in this practice. Body is body, physical sensations or feeling tone is feeling tone, mind is mind, patterns of thought as patterns of thought. And that we keep coming back to those over and over again. And that takes some doing. And you all know this because you're here. It takes an effort to keep sitting daily. It takes an effort to keep engaging with the teachings. It takes an effort to not become complacent when the meditation practice is good enough, it's easeful enough. It takes energy and effort of a very skillful sort to keep opening up to our direct experience. So this is, I suggest, where this idea of the skillful self is really also becomes a refuge. It's about the skillful interaction with our own direct experience. And the teachings really help guide us toward what to pay attention to and how to rest in that, and how to share it. The world is bigger when it's better. I'm going to end there and pass it to Kim.
Okay. Thank you, David. It's now an opportunity for you to have some discussion with each other about what's been shared so far, or really anything that's coming up in relation to refuge, because we're going to address this sense of refuge that we carry, and we'd like for you to consider the question: how might your sense of refuge, or your trust in the Dharma, or in your practice, there's many options here, sense of refuge or trust in the Dharma, in your practice, in your skillful agency, how could that be manifested in your life? Or how could it be supported more in your life? So it's a question of bringing alive what David just shared about this refuge of ourself, our skillful self, in a sense, carrying the Dharma with us. As in the text sometimes say, an island, as if we can rise above the floodwaters around us that are always threatening to overwhelm or drown us in some way. So I've set up some groups, and as always, please be careful about letting everybody just share from their own experience without commenting or giving advice on that as content, and just let it be kind of a stew that you create together. Everybody brings an ingredient, and we're making soup. Okay, so hang on for a moment. A couple things have shifted. Okay. So let's see, maybe the person with the longest hair could go first, and then on from there. Nice to see everyone back. We always think it's a good sign when people don't immediately leap to come back, but use the extra minute. Maybe that's just a story on our part. So I'm curious. We didn't get to hear all those amazing conversations, and wonder if there's anything you'd like to share in the larger group, or any other questions that may have come up at this point, questions or comments. Yeah, boss.
Thanks for my little group. That was wonderful. Well, a lot of thought-provoking stuff there that was shared. A couple of comments. One had to do with mine, and it had to do with the idea of self as a skillful refuge. Kind of hit me sideways because we've been talking about spiritual friendship, and you need another voice, um, and so the reconciliation I immediately came up with is that maybe it's all part of the same raft. You have different planks in your raft, and you use the raft to get over to the other side, and then you let everything go. So that's one. That was the thought that I had. The other thing was one of my, I guess, Sangha mates mentioned false refuge as part of his discussion. And the question, and we didn't have time to discuss it, the question was, while you're in that false refuge, how do you know that you're in it? So that was just a question that came up. Thanks for
Interesting. So when you say false refuge, I'm curious if you could say more about what that is. We did talk about the ordinary gods, which are refuges. They're just not so reliable. Um, but to say false refuge suggests something a little different.
I'll let David go because he was talking about it.
Okay.
Yes, I was the one who brought up the idea of false refuge. And what I was thinking of is the fact I am a recovering alcoholic. And for a long, long time, alcohol was a refuge.
Okay.
It made me feel good for short periods of time, but overall made things worse for a long time. And how I knew it was false was that eventually mindfulness came to the rescue. One evening in particular, I was feeling very good, so I thought this would be a wonderful time to have a martini, and which was one of my favorite drinks. So I had a martini, and I was able to observe, as a result of practicing mindfulness for quite a while, I was able to observe my mood actually change as I drank the martini.
Hmm.
That was the breakthrough that told me, that was the moment when I realized this alcohol is a false refuge. It still
Mhm.
took me probably another year before I was able to break the addiction, but that was the moment. So anyway, that was that, and that's why I was thinking of false as a sort of a third category of refuge.
That's beautifully described because it was so experiential. And I'll point out that what David said in his talk was that the four foundations of mindfulness are the way that we discover this skillful refuge. We stay within those. So mindfulness is held up as the means by which we will be able to detect. I'm changing what it says in the sutta, but we could say the way in which we can detect the quality of our refuge. And you've said it more beautifully than we could in general with your specific example. So you got it. Any other teachers want to comment on that? No. Um, I see your hand, Jerry. I also want to note that I saw Mariah's hand for a while earlier, and then it vanished. Was that a hand, Mariah?
That was a hand. Shall I say something real quick?
Yeah, we have time. It's okay. We're not in a
Okay.
hurry.
Yeah. I was just going to say that just for me, the idea of taking refuge in myself is really a double-edged sword because I practiced alone. My entire practice has been alone. Pretty much. Once in a while, I made it to some place where there was some actual people. And now, once in a while, I'm lucky enough to see you all online. But I've been so alone in my practice and it feels really unbalanced. I actually feel like I need to take refuge in Sangha really badly and need to feel that connection. Even though I do inside, the Brahma Viharas are pretty strong. So I'm sending it out a lot and feeling that connection. And I practice really for the benefit of all beings. I really, probably that's the deepest layer of my practice for me. But still I feel like I need bodies.
Mm.
So that's it.
Yeah, this is again the refuge of understanding, through mindfulness, what feels like it's the right thing. I know a teacher who says it's not that we're going to get into balance and then stay there. It's a dynamic thing where wherever we're slightly out of balance, we can always be moving toward balance in our practice because a living being is inherently kind of always moving out of balance and then back in, even in simple ways like we get hungry and then we eat. That happens a few times a day, right? And then we get tired and we sleep. So, if there's too much individual, then we go to a group. It happens on longer time scales also. So this ability to move into balance also comes through the four foundations of mindfulness. So I think, again, very accurate what you found in your experience. Thank you. So let's see, Jerry's hand was up, and then I also see Samantha. Jerry, did you?
Um, I try to be very fast, which I'm not great at. But earlier I was going to say, but I'll say it now. That for me, I noticed this morning, and I have to be careful that it doesn't become too energetic. That there needs to be a quality of equanimity. That refuge is somewhat self-generating at times. In other words, the energy supplies more goodwill and more sense of well-being and more openness. So I find that interesting. And secondly, this is close in the same ballpark, I think, of what Mariah was saying. Because David, when you read the sutta, that part of me like jumps a little bit, but then I realized the Buddha was there's no comparison between what he knew and what I know. But it does sound at times that that we're focusing on self. But it needs to be, for me, I need to just repeat that. I know that however we define self or however I define my existence, it's embedded in an interpersonal context. And so when Suchita brings up a lot, chitta, I mean, my understanding, which could be totally wrong, is that chitta is the relational part of our knowing the world. And it's heartfelt, but it's relational in that. So when you were reading that sutta, which I looked up already, and so I'm going to try to read it, there has to be a relational aspect to all of the Dharma, and it's one of the gems. So yeah. But then sometimes it seems like it's all about me, I, even though there is no me or I. So,
David, please.
Yeah, a couple thoughts on both Jerry and Mariah or Maria's questions. Yeah, it's again, I think it can be useful to recognize and enjoy these paradoxes of our practice. Like they're fun. We don't have to make this either or thing and kind of get too hung up about that. We can kind of enjoy that, for example, to Mariah's thing, we can take refuge in ourselves among others. That's legitimate. It's a legitimate way of taking refuge in this island. I remember a famous English poet once saying, "No person is an island separate from the main." I think it was John Donne, and I don't think he said person, but no, none of us are islands separate from the main. So taking refuge in ourself um, isn't opposed to seeking sangha, and that kind of takes me to Jerry's last point, just that we can get kind of what do we mean by self? One thing we mean doesn't have to exclude other things is when we say take refuge in skillful self is taking refuge in skillful actions. Even there, we can kind of get the self to the side a little bit. And it's absolutely a skillful action to find Sangha, to find community, to find, as a previous person said, find spiritual friendship, find other practitioners with whom to share how the practice is going. So anyway, I hope that kind of just let those paradoxes live and breathe. They're part of this, and it actually helps to let them live and breathe and not worry too much about which is it either or. Just kind of go, oh, I can take refuge in myself and Sangha.
Yeah. Ying, are you leaning forward there? No. Okay. Yeah, I mean, there's a way in which practice brings about both inner strength, personal strength, and great softness of being. Samantha.
Thank you. I'm kind of on along that tangent of the skillful self. And what came to me was a little concern of my awareness that I have an ego, that I haven't gotten over a lot of obscurations of myself, and wondering if you could tease out a little bit more, because I feel like my refuge in myself could bring up some unreliable refuge, if you know what I mean. And I know you talked about the skillful self, but yeah, I think what came up was it can be tricky. My mind could trick me into thinking that I'm taking refuge in a skillful self with my egos interacting, and I'm not being so skillful. I'm just wondering if you can tease that out, if it makes sense. I was trying to word my question, but that was coming up about the dangers, perhaps, the possible dangers of relying on myself when I'm aware that it's the ego's there. That makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, I can offer a few things, and I suspect some of the other teachers may also. So just briefly, uh, don't worry about it too much, in that um, there are, of course, that we have, the egotistical part, the self-centered part is not the skillful part necessarily. And part of its job, of course, is to justify its existence and try to build itself up, and that's what it does. But if we are relying on something that isn't so skillful, mindfulness will reveal that at some point, as we've heard from various other people. We don't have to get it exactly perfect. So part of the refuge is refuge in metta, in humility, in compassion. It's like, oh, whoops, that wasn't quite right. And also that, you may be developing and growing something that's going to be a refuge, but it's not quite grown yet. And so, you rely on the first rung of the ladder to step to the second, and then the second to step to the third. So the second didn't have to be perfect. It just had to get you to the third, etc. So I'll stop there. Anyone else?
Well,
Yeah,
maybe I could respond a little and then just shift into what I'll be sharing a little also. I was struck by this part of the sutta that David shared earlier, Digha Nikaya 16, that the verb that the sutta used is live as your own refuge, and elsewhere also says make an island. What did it say exactly? Something like make an island of yourself. And what evoked for me was the sense of we have a role to play in this whole process. And so by default, maybe we're kind of spinning in the godly refuges. But there is a process of, the two sentences or two verses that follow one another that David read was live as your own refuge, and then let the Dharma be your refuge. And so it's this kind of a stepping out of our usual way, but following a teaching, and we have this active participation in following the teaching, practicing the satipatthanas, such that we are more and more a refuge for ourselves and for others. And so there is this active role that we're engaging. And so we're not trying to beat down the part, the ego part, or not like get rid of this, but rather we're practicing in a way. It's almost as if, like Jerry was saying, there's more room. It's becoming spacious, where the center of our being is not so dominated by all of the self-referencing. But we have a practice that can hold that part that may be very uncomfortable or not secure, have a lot of doubts about everything, and that can be part of it. And then yet there is another part that is also growing, that actually feels more and more safe for ourselves. And this part comes from being able to recognize what's happening and being able to recognize what is actual safety and what is not. Kind of like what David Whiteside was saying, recognizing, wow, this is, this addiction is no longer, this doesn't cut for me anymore. And so it's able to begin to recognize and discern what is really safe, what is not safe. And when this kind of cultivation grow in us, we're not so dominated by the self-centeredness so much. But they can have a role, we kind of needed some aspect of living our way in the world and let them be. And so we're holding kind of a much gentler and kinder relationship with those and allow them to kind of clarify themselves. And kind of like what David was saying, it can know, wow, this is really not very helpful anymore. And so self gets a little transformed along the way. But it's not based on another part of you that demands for it to be something different, because then the two parts just start fighting the war against each other. And so there is this process. And in this cultivation, we're cultivating something that is safer, that is more spacious, and that is able to hold all parts of ourselves, the parts that we like, the parts that we don't like. And as I said, the opposite is also true. When we are not safe for ourselves, it's very hard for us to be safe to other people, other beings, or the world. And just, I was just reflecting upon this. Think about it. If I'm kind of somehow constantly fixing one part of myself or another, this is not good enough. That part needs to be some other way, Sometimes I have that in the meditation. It's like the mind wants to fix the meditation in just this other way. That's right. This other way, it's not right. And if that is the attitude or the activity that we keep reinforcing, what happens is you see other people, they're never right. You got to get them fixed all the time. However they are, it's not right. And even if you don't act it out, your relationship with the person is kind of, I guess, jagged. It doesn't feel harmony or related. I think someone used the word relational. It doesn't feel related because you're always separating this. And so in our cultivation over time, we'll begin to, little by little, begin to discern this kind of different qualities, how it show up for us. And when we are more and more living as our own refuge, there is a kind of a bigness within us. And Jerry's word, spaciousness within us. And it doesn't just stop there. And when we're safe and vast inside of ourselves, then others begin to feel safe with us. They don't feel like, you're coming to fix me or judge me all the time. And so even if you're not doing anything, just hang around with people like this, you feel a little more comfortable. You feel a little more yourself. And you feel a little more like you don't need to put some other layers on to protect yourself kind of feeling. And so this is a kind of, over time, this a refuge for ourselves began to include others, began to open up to others. And I like to share a beautiful sutta called the simile of the cloth in Majjhima Nikaya number 7. This sutta describes a simile like a cloth, when it's dirty, muddled up. It can't take any other dye on it without still look mushy. Nothing kind of can really take in because it's all messed up already. But if the cloth is very clean, then any color put on it, it can take in. It can be part of it. And at the end of this sutta, I want to read this passage to you that speaks to what I was talking about. To make yourself a refuge for all beings, and if you speak no falsehood, nor work harm for living beings, nor take what is offered not with faith and free from avarice. And so this is a sense of, in the process of making ourselves a refuge, one's own virtuous heart becomes virtuous field. One's own loving heart becomes a loving field. And kind of this sense of a metta that we maybe embody becomes a field that others can feel and resonate with as well. And the person's calm and ease in the midst of ups and downs can be a field that allow other people to feel calm and ease in the midst of maybe anxiety or fear. And someone also spoke about at some point when there's a sense of divide that we can create through very tightly controlled self-centeredness get loosened up, it's a lot easier for us to relate with each other and be kind of in touch, attuned with each other. And this is something that I think for me was still mind-blowing, that over Zoom, we feel that at times, how connected and related we are, even over a virtual a virtual space somehow. And so there are many examples of this. And this relational field is also a kind of reciprocal. And so when the field is more calm, kind, and wise, now we are affected by it also. And so there is this kind of ever-growing field that's happening. I do want to kind of speak a little bit about the shadow side of taking these words a little too literally sometimes. Make ourselves a refuge for all beings. Being a refuge for all beings is not to create another identity for ourselves. So now we're not like, oh, look at me, I'm not able to hold everybody. So now what? We're just kind of going back to a self-centeredness or a self-referencing. And there's a balance that Kim pointed out, leveraging Satipatthana practice for us to begin to see, oh, wow, sometimes we might fall back. Even with this pointing, this kind of practice, we might fall back to a kind of a self-referencing. We feel our heart is so open and generous, but look at me, so that's the kind of shadow side of the teachings like this and how we relate to them, how we hold them. And how we find our balance is through cultivation of mindful awareness to begin to be attuned to, oh, look at that, from vastness, I'm kind of going back to a contractedness. And we can feel that kind of contraction that happens within us. And then we learn to open again. And so it's an ongoing practice. It's a humble practice, and it's also a very dignified practice. Just because of that, it doesn't mean we're any less or more, but it just means that we're going to go back to the practice again. And so from here, and there is a kind of a natural responsiveness that comes forth as we cultivate this kind of open, mindful capacity. There is a natural care that flows from this that isn't dictated by how the ego wants things to be. But it's just this natural human system has a capacity to respond. We're hearing each other, or listening to each other. Our heart responses to it, our bodies responses to it, our mind responses to it. And so there's a sense of a refuge for everyone. And may that be a possibility for all of us and for the whole world. So thank you. I'll pass it on to Diana.
Thank you, Ying. Thank you. In a moment, we'll do a guided meditation, but I want to build on what we've been discussing explicitly. And that is this idea, in order for us to know what isn't helpful or what is helpful, I mean, it seems obvious, but sometimes it's helpful to be explicit. We need to be present for our experience in order for us to know, like, oh yeah, I'm being too identified with being a refuge for all beings. Or Ying read the verse from Majjhima 7, this recognition that in order for us to behave with sila and ethically, we need to be present for what we're doing and what's needed. Or in order for us to know whether taking refuge in ourself is not helpful, then we need to be present. And that was in the quote that David read from Tika 16, the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, that this notion of mindfulness, we just need to be present. And then I would say that we need to show up fully in the present moment as best we can. And this is how we can take refuge in ourselves and become a refuge for others. And there's this way in which showing up fully in the present moment allows, or is a sense of allowing natural freedom to emerge as we are letting go of a sense that this meditation has to be a particular way. I need to be having particular experiences, but instead, as best we can, to meet each moment. So I'll guide us a little bit here as we practice in this way. So taking the meditation posture, a posture that expresses our intention to meditate, so has some dignity and some uprightness, if not literally, then figuratively, as well as has some ease. And can we set an intention to discovering, allowing, experiencing safety and peace within our experience? So that can be a refuge. Feeling the body connected to the sitting surface. Maybe there's pressure against the back. Pressure against the back side. The back of the legs. Feeling the feet, whatever they are touching. Recognizing that we're grounded, we're connected, we're here. The attention to rest on the sensations of breathing. Noticing the experience of the body breathing. In a relaxed, easy way. Just being present for the experiences associated with breathing. To open it up a little bit and incline the mind and heart toward being with what is ever happening, whatever is happening in this moment. Can you be with your felt experience in this moment? Whether that's the breath, sensations in the body, sounds, maybe some mental events. Very simply, gently being with whatever our experience is. Whatever your experience is, it has a right to be there. It's just part of a flow of causes and conditions. So can you align with the reality of this moment? It isn't a begrudging, okay, it's here, but can we get on to something better? But can we have a non non-judgmental openness to whatever is being experienced. Whether it's unpleasant, whether it's pleasant, or neither unpleasant or pleasant. It's like this. Notice any like subtle urges of wanting to change our experience or avoid our experience. Being a refuge is being a place of safety for whatever experience is being had. We can always orient towards the physical sensations of sitting, feeling our sitting surface, this foundation. That's part of what's happening in this moment. And we suspend our rush to judgment and simply open to what's occurring. Because thinking is not a reliable refuge in the way that we're pointing to in this class. We need thinking, it's important, but during this meditation, can you allow whatever is occurring? It is precisely this aligning with our experience without trying to change it. It is precisely this that allows us to be not only a refuge for ourselves, but a refuge for others, to meet them where they are, in the same way we meet our experience, however it is. as best we can, meeting this moment with some peacefulness, sense of freedom. That can be a support for all beings, of course, including ourselves and others.
Thank you, Diana. That was beautiful. Yeah. Lovely illustration of sort of how to bring these ideas of refuge that we've been talking about for 3 days into practice, into the meditation. Yeah, very nice. I'm sort of, I need a moment to come back in. So we'd like to once again, and for the last time, sort of open back up to some questions or comments. Very curious how people, please feel free to ask a question about anything since this is our last opportunity, but also just what it's like to take some of this refuge seeking, refuge recognizing, refuge finding into this refuge, this island of ourselves, this island of the Dharma, that's the meditation practice. So anyway, anything's fair game, but particular curiosity about that aspect of our time together. Feel free to raise a physical hand. That's been working pretty well, or the Zoom hand.
Or maybe put something in chat too, if that feels like something you want to do rather than speaking. Or we could just meditate together some more.
Well, we can sort of keep meditating as we entertain any observations, reflections, questions that come up. Yeah. Anybody feel moved to drop something into the conversation? It may be that people are really feel calm and sweet with the meditation. Lynn, there we go. Yeah, no hurry here. Lynn is unmuting. There we go.
Okay. I have to reach. Okay. I was thinking, well, what came up for me was about wanting to change other people is that I think because of what I've gotten out of meditation, that I think with several of my friends that are really anxious, I think I haven't been very subtle about dropping these like large hints about how they need to be doing this, meditating and participating, and that I'm being kind of arrogant about it. That there's this one path that will bring some peace. And I really need to stop. um,
Very nice. I really appreciate you sharing that, Lynn, just because these are the kinds of things, these are the challenges we run up against when we open up to, as Diana encouraged us to, sort of what's really coming forward. Things sometimes we don't really want to know or admit to ourselves or share with others. So I appreciate you doing that. And I think my teaching colleagues may have thoughts as well. But, the heart of arrogance is that selfing project, and so, and in these teachings, that's not a bad thing. It's just a sign of a way of meeting experience that's less easeful than sort of letting some of that, arrogance dissolve with time, which takes time and practice. But knowing it well, recognizing it, if we want, sort of admitting to it, and really, as Diana encouraged us to, just letting that be there, um, is the way to understand more that it has suffering in it. And when we come into contact with that, the mind inclines away from that. But we can't get there without meeting that discomfort of those thoughts or of those feelings. Diana, Ying, Kim?
Yeah, maybe I'll add, Lynn, that just some of my observation in my role as a Dharma teacher is just so, and in my role as a human being too, I should say, for myself included, that so often people just want to be seen, like really felt like they've been seen by somebody. And so in the same way that you can be present for yourself with meditation, you can just show up fully for your friends. And doesn't mean it's going to cure their anxiety or anxiousness immediately, but there's something about that really can be supportive for an individual, that can really make a difference for an individual. So I offer that. That's what you're learning in meditation, to meet others in this same way that you're meeting your experiences.
Yeah, nicely put, Diana. Appreciate that. Sort of that we can notice that the arrogance sort of gets in the way of being actually able to be there for other people, and we want that. We want to connect, and we serve both ourselves and others with that. So nicely said, Diana. I'm going to pass the torch, the refuge, the island to Ying.
We're all making this together, making the refuge together. Yeah, so I feel very tender coming towards the end of this course together. Refuge has been something quite multidimensional for myself. I think for each of the teachers, and that as we were seeking our way and navigating and practicing all these years, and so I hope this course has offered this kind of multidimensionality of this word refuge, and evoked something for you, maybe some curiosity, some energy, some interest in exploring this different various aspects of it, internal, external, relational, individual, all of this. And so, and may that exploration be a source of wisdom, and source of care and compassion for everyone. And I am going to put a donation Dana link in the chat box, and so if you're curious about what to do with that, and use the link. And in our tradition, we end our session together with what we called dedication of merit. And I'm going to pass that on to Kim for us to come to a closure.
Right. Thank you to everyone, actually, all of my teaching colleagues and all of you, because as Ying said, we are all creating this together, and it really uh, could only be the class that it was because of all of you who showed up and participated and offered your wisdom. So we can take a moment to acknowledge. I mean, this is so easy to do in light of the topic we've just been discussing, to acknowledge the goodness of what we've done over our sessions together, and really take a moment to take that in, kind of in the way that we did in the meditation, just opening to what's here as we acknowledge this exploration of refuge in classical ways, in more modern ways, in maybe hopefully surprising and multidimensional ways, and just feel maybe a resonance in yourself of what it has touched for you. And then consider that that will naturally flow outward through your actions, through your speech, not necessarily in an explicit way, but it just through your way of being, that that's possible. And we have to let it. We have to let that happen. So maybe thinking about embodying this feeling that you have going forth. And it will touch the others in your household, maybe the people you meet if you're going to the grocery store today, and anyone you meet online. And just from there, it can ripple out farther than we even know. So maybe it will even affect us through the coming week. In this, it wasn't an accident that we chose this topic for this week before next week in the US. So may that be the case. May all beings be happy. May all beings be peaceful. May all beings find the deepest refuge that they can touch, such that this world has a bit more of the good in it. Thank you, everyone. I'm lacking a bell, so we'll just make our own bell.
Ding.
Ding.
Take care, everyone.
And
We'll see
feel
you
free
again.
to unmute. Oh, there's Ying. Feel free to unmute and say goodbye or send something in the chat.
Bye.
Bye.
Everyone.
See you next